harsh sound of heavy wheels grinding against limestone was swallowed by a sudden, dead silence. The year was 1003 before Christ. Beneath the crushing heat of the Judean plateau, the rugged terrain took its toll. The oxen stumbled in the fine dust. The cart tilted violently to the side. In a purely human reflex, a deeply instinctive movement of protection, Uzzah reached out his right hand. His bare fingers brushed the gleaming golden surface of the Ark of the Covenant. He did not scream. There was no prolonged spasm. There were no visible marks on his skin. In the exact millisecond, his body made contact with the sacred metal. His heart simply stopped. Uzzah collapsed lifeless on the dry earth, right in front of 30,000 men who froze in sheer terror under the desert sun. For more than 3 millennia, history has echoed a single explanation for the events of that day on the road to Jerusalem. Tradition taught us that Uzzah perished instantly for touching the untouchable, a purely spiritual retribution for breaking divine protocol. That is the version that survived the test of time, but that is also the version that hides a much deeper, far more terrifying reality. The answer to that man's sudden death does not lie solely in an invisible divine wrath. It rests in a meticulous, exact, and highly lethal engineering. An engineering slowly forgotten over the centuries. The oldest records of the Hebrew text carry precise data that changes everything we thought we knew. In the scrolls of Exodus, there is far more than just religious law. There are 15 rigid, technical specifications about the construction of that chest, minute details about interleaved bimetallic layers, strict demands for desert wood with very unique physical properties, extreme protocols for human isolation and transport. What was rolling forward on that wooden cart was not just the spiritual emblem of a nation, it was an incredibly complex material structure. When Uzzah's sweaty hand reached for the solid gold that afternoon, he did not merely touch the holy. He completed a circuit that forgave no biological flaws. And the event that shocked King David was not defying the laws of nature. It was enforcing them against all odds with ruthless mathematical precision. The hot wind swept across the Judean plateau in the year 1003 before Christ. Fine limestone dust rose in heavy clouds. It clung to the sweaty skin of the 30,000 chosen men marching under King David's command. This was not just a simple journey. It was the most important, highly anticipated military and religious procession of their entire generation. David had conquered the impenetrable fortress of Jerusalem only 2 years prior. Now, he desperately needed the ultimate symbol of authority to legitimize his reign and unite the 12 fragmented tribes of Israel, the Ark of the Covenant. The distance between Kiriath Jearim and the new capital was roughly 9 miles. 9 miles of rugged, arid, and unforgiving mountainous terrain. At the peak of summer in that region, the temperature easily topped 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The relative humidity was practically zero. The physical environment alone drained the life out of any man. But the massive crowd sang. They moved to the rhythm of a deep celebration, playing wooden instruments, harps, lyres, and tambourines. In the very center of all that commotion, a cart made of virgin wood rolled forward. David and his advisors had made a decision that seemed completely dignified. They believed that offering a brand new transport pulled by strong oxen would be the highest possible honor to house the most sacred artifact on earth. It was a fatal miscalculation, and it would exact a terrible toll. Walking beside that swaying structure was Uzzah. He and his brother, Ahio, were guiding the animals down the bumpy road. The ark was no mystery to them. The artifact had remained in their family's home, under their father's watch, for 20 long years. To most of the soldiers and musicians around them, the golden chest was a distant emblem of unfathomable power, a power that had brought down mighty walls and terrified the ancient Philistines. But for Uzzah, it was almost a household item. It was something he had seen since his youth, and oftentimes extreme familiarity with the sacred breeds the worst kind of danger, the loss of reverential fear, and the complete forgetting of the most basic rules of engagement. The account preserved in the second book of Samuel is raw. It is direct and stripped of any literary embellishment. When the giant caravan reached an unstable point on the road, known as the threshing floor of Nacon, the ground gave way beneath the animals' hooves. The oxen faltered under the load. The cart tilted dangerously. The concentrated weight of the gold and wood shifted violently toward the hard-packed dirt. Uzzah, driven by a swift, almost desperate instinct to protect, lunged forward. He grabbed the metallic surface with his bare hands. He just wanted to stop the ultimate symbol of Israel from hitting the dust. The response was immediate, silent, and devastating. The sacred text declares that divine wrath burned against Uzzah in that exact fraction of a second, without a cry for help, without any sign of agony. His heart went completely silent. He dropped dead right there. He met his tragic end beside the artifact, the very instant his skin closed the contact with the object. The music stopped. The singing gave way to a deeply terrifying, grave-like silence. It paralyzed thousands of witnesses. David, overcome by a mix of sheer panic, sorrow, and deep frustration, halted the entire operation on the spot. He was terrified to proceed with something he did not fully understand. He ordered the route to be changed immediately. The ark was rushed to the home of a man named Obed-Edom, the Gittite. There, that imposing object would remain in total isolation for 3 highly tense months. The version we have heard all our lives clearly teaches us about judgment when the sacred is violated. But what history often leaves out is the massive technical abyss. The gap that separated David's good intentions from Uzzah's fatal outcome. The disaster did not begin when the oxen stumbled. It began with the complete ignorance of an instruction manual, a manual carved into the oldest scrolls of that nation. The book of Numbers, in its 4th chapter, held strict and non-negotiable guidelines. Transporting that artifact was a highly calculated responsibility. It was granted exclusively to the Levites from the family of Kohath, and the fundamental rule, written explicitly to guarantee the biological survival of the carrier, was unbreakable. The transport had to be done solely using insulating wooden poles resting on the shoulders. Any direct contact was strictly forbidden. The text itself warned that touching those surfaces would result in immediate loss of life. That was not just a liturgical ceremony. It was a physical safety perimeter. It was an absolute isolation protocol that had been completely ignored under the grueling desert heat. Before we move forward to the camps in the Sinai, before we reveal the exact engineering that turned the Ark of the Covenant into a material instrument capable of ending a life with a single touch, I want to quickly ask you to hit that like button. It helps this documentary reach more people. It hugely supports all the rigorous research done to bring these stories straight to you. And so I can get to know who is watching today, leave your answer in the comments below. Are you a Christian attending a church? Do you enjoy studying ancient artifacts and biblical events on your own? Or Are you simply passionate about ancient history facts? I will read and reply to every single comment with the utmost respect and care. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let us return to the original texts. Let us discover what the gold and the wood were really hiding. To truly grasp the magnitude of the mistake made on the Judean plateau, we must travel back in time, almost 500 years before Uzzah's collapse. The dust rising was not from a limestone road, but from the rocky base of Mount Sinai. The year was right around 1440 before Christ. There, beneath a dense cloud and a silence that commanded terror and deep reverence, Moses did not just receive moral guidelines. He did not just get spiritual songs to govern a people. He received an architectural blueprint, a highly technical manual for construction and precision engineering, one that simply did not allow for flaws or human adaptations. The records preserved in chapter 25 of the book of Exodus detail the exact instructions for building the Ark of the Covenant. And when we analyze those lines today, with the strict lens of material science, what emerges from the parchment pages is not just a ceremonial object of worship. It is a structure meticulously designed based on highly specific and very dangerous physical properties. The command required the base of the artifact to be built entirely out of acacia wood. The acacia found in the desert is not your average timber. It grows in extremely arid conditions. This makes it dense, heavy, and above all, a formidable natural insulator. It is highly resistant to moisture and the passage of time. But the divine order did not stop there. This wooden box, measuring roughly 45 inches in length by 27 inches in width and height, had to be strictly plated. Pure gold on the inside, pure gold on the outside. Picture the structure coming together in the hands of the craftsmen at the Israelite camp. There was an inner layer of conductive metal, a thick, insulating wooden core, and a second, outer layer of conductive metal. And resting on top of this box was a massive lid, the mercy seat. It was carved from a single piece of pure gold, flanked by two figures of cherubim. Their wings were spread high, facing the center of the lid. The precision of this design came with a handling protocol that left absolutely zero room for human initiative. The sacred text commanded the casting of 4 solid gold rings fixed to the lower corners of the structure. Through these rings went 2 long poles. They were also made of the same insulating acacia wood and overlaid with gold. Once inserted, these poles were never to be removed from the rings. They served as the only permitted interface, the only physical bridge between fragile humanity and this unforgiving artifact. The Book of Numbers cements this technical restriction. Only the descendants of Kohath, Levites exhaustively trained for that specific purpose, had the clearance to lift the weight of that box. And even then, the instruction carried a definitive warning in chapter 4. They must not touch the holy things, or they will die. In the original Hebrew language, the word used for the act of touching is naga. It means making direct physical contact with the surface. The grammatical structure of that ancient sentence does not suggest a distant judgment. It is not a punishment postponed for the future. The Hebrew particle used indicates an immediate cause and effect relationship, instantaneous. To touch meant to perish in that very second. For almost its entire existence after the desert, the Ark rested in the absolute darkness of the Holy of Holies. It was hidden behind a thick, heavy veil. For more than 300 days a year, it remained completely untouchable, isolated from outside moisture, from sunlight, and from the presence of any unauthorized human being. The environment was strictly dark and tightly controlled. Its peculiar engineering demanded absolute isolation from the surrounding nature. When King David ignored those texts, he pulled the ark from its safe resting place. He placed it on an open cart of ordinary wood, pulled by animals out in the open. Out under the blazing sun and the bone-dry summer air of Judea, he was not just bending an old liturgical rule. He was exposing a highly complex bimetallic structure to the unstable elements of the open environment. He was dismantling the only protection that kept human biology safe around it. The Judean air did not just carry the heavy weight of the heat. It carried constant friction. Throughout the 9 miles of that fateful journey, the sturdy new cart bumped and jolted forward. It was completely exposed to the dry, biting wind of the plateau. At that time of year, the relative humidity was dangerously low. It plummeted to under 20% during the hottest hours of the day. And it is precisely in this unforgiving setting that profound religious narrative and modern material science collide. They converge in a way that forever alters our understanding of the sacred texts. The engineering detailed in the book of Exodus did not just demand riches to honor God. An inner plate of pure gold, separated by a thick core of bone-dry acacia wood, wrapped by a second plate of solid gold on the outside. This is not a simple decorative box meant to impress enemy nations. In the field of exact sciences, this highly specific and methodical arrangement of elements has a very clear name. It forms a natural dielectric capacitor, an architecture designed with the staggering physical ability to accumulate and store massive electrostatic charges. When the artifact rested in the darkness of the tabernacle, sheltered by thick layers of animal skins and isolated from the desert wind, its environment remained neutral and strictly controlled. But now, under the ruthless sunlight, swaying on David's makeshift cart, the conditions had changed drastically. Every gust of dry wind, loaded with dust and fine sand particles, repeatedly slammed against the golden surface. The continuous friction, hour after hour, stripped and moved electrons across that metallic shield. If the ark had been in direct contact with the dirt road, this invisible charge would have silently dissipated into the ground. However, it was mounted on the thick wood of a newly built transport. The cart itself acted as a massive insulating block. It brutally cut off any possibility of grounding. The energy had absolutely nowhere to go. Mile after mile, the charge potential kept rising in total silence. Modern engineering studies on isolated metallic structures in desert regions prove a shocking fact. Under constant friction and very low humidity, such objects can easily store power exceeding 10,000 volts. The Ark of the Covenant had become a ruthless reservoir of energy. It was stressed to its absolute breaking point. Then, the procession reached the uneven grounds of the threshing floor of Nacon. The earth gave way. The animals lost their footing. The cart tilted sharply. It violently shifted the center of gravity of the heavy golden lid and the towering cherubim. Uzzah was walking right beside the wheels. Sweat coated his skin after the grueling physical effort of the long march. His feet were completely bare, stepping firmly on the dusty limestone earth. Biologically speaking, in that exact second, the exhausted guide's body was the perfect conductor. He was a vessel full of water and minerals. Driven by the primal instinct to keep his people's greatest legacy out of the dirt, he threw all caution to the wind. He extended his arm in an absolute, blinding reflex. The instant Uzzah's damp palm pressed against the solid gold sheet, The physical gap separating that massive electrical charge from the earth vanished entirely. He did not just touch the glory of Israel. He closed a high-voltage circuit. He tragically transformed himself into the grounding wire. All the energy accumulated through hours of friction instantly found the path of least resistance. The shockwave ripped through the metallic structure. It invaded Uzzah's arm and tore straight through his chest before discharging completely into the solid ground of Judea. The account in the second book of Samuel describes the event with a terrifying sobriety. It states that he fell lifeless right there, beside the ark. There is absolutely no mention in the ancient records of flames, burned clothing, dramatic convulsions, or visible marks of agony. And the total absence of these external signs proves the accuracy of the event with devastating precision. A massive discharge of direct current does not create visual spectacles in human biology. It strikes the central nervous system directly. It causes a sudden, irreversible halt to the human heartbeat. The body collapses in that same fraction of a second, like a dead weight of lead in freefall. The force that paralyzed Uzzah on that sunny afternoon did not have to break the laws of the physical universe to prove its ultimate authority. Quite the opposite. It used the laws of physics with surgical precision. The forgotten rules in the Book of Numbers, demanding the exclusive use of non-conductive wooden poles, were not ritualistic props meant to make human labor harder. They were non-negotiable survival tools. By underestimating the thermal and physical isolation of the artifact, David and his men did not face a random, mystical curse. They witnessed exactly what happens when human fragility confronts the pure, raw material reality. A reality designed at the very foot of Mount Sinai. The gulf separating the Judean plateau from our modern world seems incredibly vast. But the invisible laws governing nature remain absolutely intact. The terrifying power that ended Uzzah's last breath over 3 millennia ago did not vanish into the sands of time. It was not extinguished. It was merely renamed. It was meticulously studied. And it was surrounded by rigorous engineering protocols that modern humanity learned to respect only under the heavy burden of countless, irreparable losses. If you walk behind the scenes of a power plant today, or look at the high-voltage systems cutting through our sprawling cities, you will find the exact same logic of survival that Moses recorded on those desert scrolls. The conductive copper cables carrying lethal energy are thickly insulated by layers of rubberized polymers. The most basic principle of industrial safety forbids any technician from directly touching energized metal. To do so risks immediate death, unless they use maneuver poles built from non-conductive materials. That modern instruction is an almost flawless replica of the Levitical order. The very order that demanded the sacred transport be done exclusively with poles made of acacia wood. When a modern isolation protocol is violated, the outcome is a dramatic mirror of the event at the threshing floor of Nacon. Annual workplace safety records document hundreds of incidents, cases where highly experienced professionals, overcome by the very same familiarity and overconfidence that blinded the guide of that ancient cart, close an electrical circuit with their own bodies. The instant discharge of high-voltage direct current causes a sudden, catastrophic failure in the human heart's electrical system. The body simply collapses, falling completely inert. No deep external marks, no flames, no time for any defensive reaction whatsoever. Physics is silent, and it is terribly final. To truly understand the sheer scale of these connections, we must look at the Word of God, not as isolated fragments, but as a flawlessly geared historical engine. That is why I want to take a special moment with you if you value a deep dive into the Scriptures. The Bible is not just a historical book. It is a sacred library made up of 66 distinct works. Works crafted over the course of nearly 1,500 years of human history. Reading and grasping these texts in the exact order the events took place completely transforms our vision. With that in mind, I have pinned in the comments our beautiful ebook, The Bible in Chronological Order. It was put together with the utmost reverence to help you visualize the grand timeline. From creation to Revelation, it reveals the historical context of each era and shows exactly how every piece fits into the master plan of redemption. It is a foundational tool to strengthen your faith and enrich your view of the past. The link is right down below. Getting back to our material investigation, modern science offers us even more striking data about what was actually resting under the Judean sun. In the year 2018, space agency experts documented crucial studies on electrostatic action in incredibly low humidity environments. They proved beyond a doubt that isolated metallic objects, when exposed to continuous friction in arid atmospheres, can hoard invisible charges well over 35,000 volts. That voltage is virtually identical to the power surging through modern defibrillators or high-performance industrial capacitors. The Ark of the Covenant, with its pure gold plates sandwiched between highly dense wood, formed a staggering capacitor. The object that inhabited the Holy of Holies and demanded more than 300 days of absolute dark seclusion every year was not a mere ceremonial piece built to awe peasants. It was a functioning device. It operated in perfect harmony with the very laws of physics set in motion by the Creator himself. The rigorous purification rules, the ban on damp footwear, the specific linen garments worn by the priests, and the non-negotiable prohibition of direct contact. These were not just rituals. They were survival manuals for navigating an environment of immense electrostatic danger. Uzzah was not the victim of some capricious, irrational explosion of wrath. He was the unfortunate human witness to an unbending universal law, a law that cannot be bypassed, not even by the best of intentions. The material glory that marched with Israel and terrified its enemies was very, very real. It was tangible, and when we finally understand the actual mechanics behind that fatal moment, our reverence for the ancient text does not shrink. It expands colossally. The narrative was not forging myths. It was describing a physical reality so exact, so palpable, and so formidable that it would take humanity nearly 3,000 years just to harness it and finally give it a name. The tomb-like silence that descended upon the Judean plateau, paralyzing King David's 30,000 men, was devastating. But it was not an unprecedented event in the long memory of Israel. Long before Uzzah's heart stopped on that dusty road, the dry desert air had already witnessed the ruthless, lethal force of sacred geometry. The Ark of the Covenant, with its highly dangerous, invisible bimetallic engineering, was not a solitary anomaly built in a vacuum. It was, in fact, the centerpiece of a much broader, highly advanced technological, architectural, and ritualistic system. A system designed with pinpoint precision at the foot of Mount Sinai. To comprehend the true scale of this constant, looming danger that surrounded the ancients, we must step past the heavy linen curtains of the original tabernacle. We have to walk through the thick shadows of the holy place, an environment where the silence was absolute and the tension was practically palpable. There, shielded from the punishing desert sun, yet subjected to the incredibly arid, moistureless air, rested a second artifact. It was built upon the exact same technical foundations that would claim Uzzah's life centuries later. The book of Exodus, in its 30th chapter, preserved the highly detailed blueprint of this second structure, the altar of incense. The original measurements commanded to Moses called for a piece of imposing proportions. It formed a perfect square, measuring 18 inches wide by 36 inches high. And once again, the divine instruction allowed absolutely zero margin for interpretation or cutting corners on materials. The core of the structure had to be carved entirely out of acacia wood, the same desert timber, heavily known for its extreme density and its formidable capacity to act as the perfect physical insulator. And over that wood, the order demanded an outpouring of pure gold. Thick sheets of conductive metal entirely coating the top surface, the four corners, and all the side extensions. And, just to prove that the major concern of this architecture was not some mere aesthetic whim to honor the heavens, but rather a strict demand for biological survival, the project received the exact same transportation warning. The same pure gold rings were cast and mounted to its sides. The same long poles, made of insulating acacia and coated in metal, were slid into those rings. The non-negotiable rule was identical to the one imposed on the Ark. The direct touch of human skin on those surfaces was strictly, absolutely forbidden. The penalty was the immediate loss of life. The altar of incense was, for all practical purposes of material physics, a second giant dielectric capacitor. It was erected to remain completely isolated, ungrounded, silently accumulating static charges in the closed, bone-dry environment of the sacred tent. And, in the very same tragic way that would later unfold with David's makeshift transport, the relentless lethality of this structure was put to the test. It was tested against human fragility, presumption, and fatal error. The account found in the 10th chapter of the book of Leviticus takes us straight to the day that was supposed to be the absolute pinnacle of the priesthood's consecration. Instead, it became the darkest hours in the leadership of the high priest, Aaron. His two oldest sons, Nadab and Abihu, had been separated and strictly instructed to officiate the internal rites. They felt the heavy weight of the sacred garments. They knew the deep isolation of the room, and they knew the rigid rules of approach by heart. Yet, extreme familiarity with an environment often breeds a highly dangerous illusion of control. The ancient historical record notes that, at a certain point that day, the two brothers grabbed their metal censers. They loaded them with burning coals and incense, and they decided to cross the sacred perimeter. They brought an entirely unauthorized element right into the presence of the artifact. The original Hebrew text uses a mysterious, sharp expression, Ish Zara, a phrase that has crossed ages and empires, landing in our Western Bibles translated simply as strange fire. For dozens of centuries, countless generations of readers and scholars peacefully accepted that this passage was merely describing a moral infraction, a breach of spiritual etiquette, a careless ritual that triggered an immediate, purely mystical, punitive response. But when we place this narrative under the harsh light of the laws of thermodynamics and electricity, the very laws we just applied to Uzzah's death, the old story of Nadab and Abihu takes on a crushing, terrifying material weight. What is the sacred text really describing between the lines of that event? Are we really looking at an abstract liturgical failure? Or did that ancient parchment preserve the surgical memory of an uncontrolled ignition? Think about the closed setting, the dense air with zero humidity, the bimetallic structure of the altar, highly charged by the static energy of the isolated room, charged by the continuous friction of the priests, moving around in heavy wool and linen garments. When Nadab and Abihu recklessly stepped in, completely breaking the isolation protocol, they introduced heat and unstable material dangerously close to that electrified gold. They triggered a chain reaction that their biology simply could not withstand. The reaction was intensely physical, deafeningly silent, and utterly devastating. The invisible power discharged. Nadab and Abihu perished the exact second the connection was made. There was absolutely no time for screams of agony. There were no precious seconds to try and escape the tent. Their lives were snuffed out instantly by the impact of a catastrophic technical failure. They collapsed, lifeless, right in front of that uncompromising device. Their father, Aaron, watched the terrifying outcome unfold. He was strictly forbidden by Moses himself from shedding a single tear or mourning publicly, because the tragedy was the direct result of violating the rigid rules set in place to handle forces that simply do not tolerate amateurs. That imposing, highly dangerous golden altar did not remain untouchable forever. Its precious, lethal plates were eventually looted and melted down by the armies of Nebuchadnezzar. That happened in the year 586 before Christ, when the fury of Babylon reduced Jerusalem to absolute ruins. Silence blanketed the destroyed city, and the physical object vanished into the mists of Oriental antiquity. However, the rigorous Levitical manual survived. The original texts describing every single ring, every specific measurement of insulating wood, and every fatal warning about that forgotten technology outlived the fall of massive empires. They survived the brutal test of time. The architectural blueprint of an artifact that demanded absolute submission and high technical knowledge was preserved entirely intact. It stayed hidden right beneath layers of religious tradition, right inside the pages we still flip through today. And that is exactly our next great frontier. In the upcoming documentary of this series, we are going to digitally and historically reconstruct the heavy curtains of the tabernacle. We will thoroughly analyze the chemical composition of that strange fire, and we will unravel the true mechanics behind the sudden, shocking loss of Aaron's sons. The sheer power resting within those desert metals holds profound answers. Answers that took humanity millennia to even begin to understand through the advancements of modern science. Our deep dive into the material scenes and the immense genius hidden within the texts of the Holy Bible is only just beginning.